Hello everybody and welcome to VFR. Today we are here on the ground in Redmond, Oregon. We're going to be doing a full flight check ride for the SimWorks Studios PC-12, one of my favorite turboprops in the game right now. So the PC-12 is a single engine turboprop, low wing, capable of carrying 8 passengers or being fitted out for cargo. They have an executive interior that comes too. Today we're doing the 4-bladed variant. The 5-bladed variant is going to perform very similarly, and all the same things are going to apply for that as far as our check ride today. So let's hop into the airplane, get it set up, ready to fly, and get on out to Boise as our destination today. Alright, so when you load into the SimWorks Studios PC-12, you're going to be greeted with something like this. And if we try to move this, it won't work yet. Don't fear, it's not a graphics bug. You've just got the sunshade in. We're going to click on the windshield to remove it, and then you can put your visors back up. Now, if you want to display co-pilots or pilots, you have these seat levers. This was recently changed from the headrest. Let me spin my wheels for a minute. I don't know that we can hide the passengers anymore, but they did fix the bug with the cargo not showing, so now we can get cargo. The other things, I have some custom views bound to go open the door. So if you want to open the door, you have to pull the red lever, then click on the door. And if you want to open the rear cargo door, so you want to find the click spot. And there it goes. So we can open up both of these by doing that. So I have these bound for custom views just so I can get in here to close the doors. Then when we pull the door back up, bring it in and then lock it, we should see green on the door indicators there. So next thing, and I basically just follow the checklist that comes with the airplane. It's pretty good. It has most of the things in here. And I find that it gets me in the air and works. You can use whatever you want. But that's what I use for this. So first things first, control wheel lock, this thing here, we want to click it. Now clicking it puts it in our hand, and then we kind of have to bend over here and put it on the hook there to stow it, and that stows all of our stuff too. If you don't stow it and you click on the yoke, you'll actually control lock out your airplane, and that is not a beneficial thing while in flight. Next up, parking brake pulled out, it's down here. I, of course, have that bound and set. Wheel chocks and all the stuff is removed. We can just go out and make sure of all that. All our pitot covers and wheel chocks are gone. Crew seats and seat belts are adjusted and secured. Overhead electrical switches, we want everything off for the moment, and then we're going to turn standby bus on. That's going to turn on the standby bus, give us some lights and things like that. We want to make sure that all our cooling is off, but our inertial separator can be turned open. Seatbelt signs, I'll turn them on since we're already in theory loaded, but that's here. So again, I have a custom bound here. These buttons are going to be most of what you're interacting with these systems with. Your lights, your test panel, fuel pumps should always be in auto, your starter panel, then your electrics and battery here. And then this is basically anti-icing and inertial separator here. And then cooling and heating is for the internal cabin. So with all that stuff on, we can test the EPS switch. And we should see a green light there. We'll turn that on, or we'll arm it. And we'll make sure ECS, your cabin control, your environmental control switch, off. Next on the checklist is to make sure these things are all in the idle position. I've done that where you don't know what this lever is, you turn it all the way up to max, and then you take off whenever you turn on the power. That's an override power lever. The main power lever is here with a reverse axis. So I have a Honeycomb Bravo that I've bound all this stuff to. I basically bound the throttle, the condition lever, using the Microsoft Flight Simulator inbuilt condition axis, and then I have flaps bound as well. I also have it set up to bind to a reverse on a button push, but you can do that however works the best. But I do recommend you have it, especially if you want to do any short field landing. Reverse power is useful. But that's all in the idle position now. We've double checked that, and we can go up to the top and turn our batteries on. So we'll turn battery 1 on, battery 2 on, make sure our nav lights are on here. If we want to use external power, we can turn that on. That will, hook up a GPU, and we'll get an on indication here from that. So weight and balance. I've loaded up the airplane with 6 passengers and 330 pounds of cargo, and about half. We're going to stick with half fuel. The flight plan we're flying out to Boise calls for 1,080 pounds of fuel. We've got about 1,300 pounds of fuel on board now, so that will work. So the next step is to set up our fuel totalizer and make sure this is all working. So I like to go to test, and that'll just run through all of the indicators here. Basically, the top 3 rows are your engine, then you have your fuel information and your fuel levels here, and then your engine oil temperatures and pressures, and some electrical information down here. So this will take a minute to boot up. We can even reset it. And if you click the menu button, it will just display this information down here as numbers. Okay, so that has good. We've got about half fuel. That makes sense. Landing gear position light. We want to make sure we're seeing 3 green. Our gear is down. And then going down here to our cause page, basically our annunciators or anything our caution or warning panel is throwing. Down here we've got Gen 1 and Gen 2 off. That makes sense. The pusher test, which we'll talk about, that's a test we have to run to verify the stall protection systems are working. ECS is also off right now, so that makes sense. And then we haven't turned on our avionics or our essential bus. So at this point, it's pretty quick to get up to ready to start. We are ready to start, and it's a very simple startup. So, again, you either need to be ready to move your condition lever here physically or have it bound. I have it bound so you won't see me look down. But all we have to do is make sure that our prop area is clear. We're pretty clear here. And then we're going to go up to start. We're going to turn our beacon switch on. Let's turn on the beacon light. And then we're going to hit the starter button. So the engine's going to start to spool up. You will see NG rising. And at about 20%, we want to put the condition lever into ground idle. So 17, 18, 19, and then I just move it about halfway to ground idle. And then we're monitoring the rest of it to make sure that it does spool up. This did make some notes because SimWorks Studios removed failures from this model. It'll come later on as an add-on. So there's no failures now. But in the future, they're planning a package that will have it and incorporate it. So it may be more important, but again, it's a very simple startup procedure. Engine's on, everything's stabilizing. We got oil pressures in the green, temperatures rising, and nothing's redded out. So after start checklist, our engine instruments have been checked. We're going to turn our generators on. So Gen 1 on, Gen 2 on. We can turn external power off. Avionics, our Avionics 1 and 2 switches on. And the standby bus now can come off. Cooling and heating, it's 1 degree C here in the cabin, so it's a little bit chilly. So let's give them heat. It's winter, so heat, but in the summer you have some cooling systems here as well. So you can turn on your fans, turn on the whole system and all that. We want to make sure that the EPS, that's the emergency power system, is off. And our ECS can now go to auto. We should just see the cause panel with pusher as the only thing illuminated. Finally, after start, we're going to bring flaps down to flaps 15 so we can do the pusher test. So now with our avionics on and everything, I have the GTN 750 from PMS, the free version installed. You can use whichever version of this you want. You can use the 530 and 430 if you don't have either, or this one's completely free, or you can use the TDS model. So we're going to Redmond. I'm going to punch in our flight up to Boise. And again, it'll depend on which system you're using, how you do this specifically. But it's not a very complicated flight plan. we are basically going straight to a VOR and then straight on to Boise. Yeah, India, Lima, Romeo. So after start checklist, we're going to come up here and switch the inverters. I'm just going to switch it back to Gen 1. And now we're going to perform the pusher test. So, and we'll see here, but this has a stall protection kind of shaker system similar to what you'd see on the 737, where it'll shake if you're at a high angle of attack and low speed. Basically, as a stall prevention system. So we have to test that system every time we go to fly. I think you have to do it every leg. You can get away with turning the engine off and not doing it in this model, but I believe in real life you are required to do it every leg. So to start this, we're going to turn on the pusher button here. And for the pusher test, we also need to have flaps 15 set. So flaps 15, parking brake, and then put the pusher test button on. And then you're going to slowly bring the throttle up until it starts to shake. Bring your power back to idle. It's going to go do this whole thing. It's going to go in and shake. And then you need to come here to the pusher interrupt button here and hold that down for 5 seconds. 1, 3, 4, 5, until we see that pusher light come back. Once we see the pusher light come back, we can disengage the pusher interrupt and come up and start the test. We also have lamp test and fire test. Lamp test just does all this stuff, and fire test just tests the fire protection system enunciators. So that's your pusher test, though, and that's done. It's not hard, but it is a little bit of a tricky thing, and if you don't do it, you're just going to have that caution the whole flight. So our avionics are set up. Our cabin pressure controller down here. So we've got flight level 230 punched in right now. So basically, we're going to set the aircraft altitude to 2.3 or so. And then this will just pressurize the cabin to what it's saying is 6,000 feet for that cruising altitude. Easy to forget. And then we're going to turn the transponder on, and I'm just going to squawk my Genera 2000 for non-ATC. VATSIM, but whatever you need to squawk. Let's go get our frequency set up to 122.8. Finally, we're going to check AHRS 1 and 2. This is the correct configuration, but we just want to check and make sure nothing's gotten bumped there. And then altitude pre-select. So we're going to climb out on the... we're at Redmond. I don't know that we have a departure. The Redmond 3 departure would be something we could do. And that has a top altitude assigned by ATC. So we're going to say 10,000 just because I don't know exactly what that would be. And ARM. So we have the altitude pre-select. So this is how you're going to select the altitude that you want to use. And like other airplanes with this system, you have to hit ARM to get it to try to capture that altitude. If you don't hit ARM, it won't do anything. You also have a vertical speed mode. If you pull it and engage, you can climb and descend in vertical speed. That's how you do that. We're 10,000 feet, and we are armed right now. Fuel quantity is good, and the cause are appropriate. We have AOA de-ice, which just means we need to turn on some de-icing here. Now, as far as the de-icing system, we also have prop de-ice that we can turn on, and windshield heat. We can turn on to low for now. You have a high setting that you adjust with this button. We also can activate our de-icing boots, either for 1 minute or 3 minute cycles. All right, so we're ready to go here. Let's turn taxi lights on. And let's get the weather at Redmond. So we can pick up a few runways at Redmond. 0803, we're right here down at 11. That's going in the right direction. So we're going to taxi just straight ahead over here by Charlie to runway 11 in lieu of any other conditions. Redmond traffic.com 88, we're PC-12 taxiing to runway 11 via Charlie, Redmond. All right, so on the taxi roll, taxi checklist, we're going to want to check flight controls. Just left and right. And you'll notice as you turn it, the rudder pedals move too. That's because the PC-12 has a scaling rudder and yaw interconnect, where as you turn the yoke, it will also add rudder to try and help you maintain stable flight. The PC-12 as a fixed-wing airplane is one of the most rudder-intensive ones that I've seen in this. I think you need rudder pedals to really enjoy this plane because you are going to be very active on the rudder. And from what I can tell, that's realistic. I can't say the flight model's not exaggerated or anything. I'm not a PC-12 pilot, but I do hear that it's kind of a handful in that way because you got a big engine on kind of a light little airplane. So, other thing, flight director and flight instruments. We're just going to set this up for an initial heading of probably 110. Will be over here. So I like to start out in heading mode. It just depends on what you're doing, but that'll give you the right flight director cues here. We also want to turn the keep the yaw damper off for now, but I like to cue up our climb mode as well. And then if you want to pull up the GPS or cycle through your different navigation sources, you use this panel down here. So we can show it in HSI mode, which we are. We can go over to an ARC mode if you prefer that, and then we can cycle between ADF, VOR, and GPS. And then 1 and 2, especially on the, I don't know if you get on the ADF, but on the VOR, we can swap between 1 and 2. Then you have your heading bug and course bug down here. The rest of the autopilot controls are on this panel here up top. But we are all set up for cruise. We're going to fly runway heading and climb to 10,000 feet. And then we'll keep the climb going to flight level 230. Maybe a little high for Boise. We may get up there and come back down, but we'll see. Should be about a 55-minute flight, but we should be able to climb pretty well. The other thing, electric trim, we want to make sure that that's set for takeoff. So here are your trim panels, and we want to make sure that we are trimmed out for takeoff, which basically means putting it kind of close to the diamond. All right, so we've got the trim set up. We're ready to go. Right about on the green diamond for takeoff.
EGPWS.
We'll do
System OK.
We'll do our JipWiz test. Just clicking that, make sure. We're not going to inhibit terrain for the moment as we climb out. Shouldn't be a huge factor. In our crew briefing, we're going to be taking off here from Redmond. We'll runway 11. We're going to climb up to 10,000 or comfortable altitude, and then we'll make the left-hand turn towards the India Lima November VOR. I believe it's like it's a cool name, VOR. Wild Horse, not War Horse, but Wild Horse. So one more thing before we get onto the runway, because once we get onto the runway, things are going to happen. They're going to happen fast. And this is an airplane where if you get behind it, and you can skid very ungracefully on the takeoff. We want to check that we're in flaps 15. We can use flaps 30 for a short field takeoff. We don't need it today. We'll make sure our lights are on. That's taxi lights, landing lights, and strobes. Our ice protection, I've got probes on right now. We won't turn propeller de-ice until we see some visible moisture. The outside air temperature is 1°C, so it may be a safe thing to do as we climb out. So let's turn that on, and we will leave the boots off until we actually see icing. It's not going to do anything till then. Ice protection as required. Condition lever. So before we take the runway, we need to move the condition lever to the flight idle. You should hear the engine idle change. And make sure that we're not seeing anything on our cause. We've got pusher and ice mode. That's what it's supposed to do. So as we're ready to roll out, we can release the brakes, and you'll feel you have a lot more power in flight idle mode. RedmondTraffic.com 88 PC-12 taking runway 11, departing out to the east Redmond. So we're going to line up, and I would recommend lining up, getting yourself nice and situated, and holding on the brakes. So talking through the takeoff, we're going to basically gently and slowly, gradually bring it up to full power, right about putting your torque PSI in the yellow. So we're going to bring torque pressure up to where in the yellow it's about 40, 41 PSI. We don't really want to just slam it forward because you could redline it. We'll gradually bring that up, but the engine's going to lag a little bit. That's something you'll notice throughout. Your power inputs are going to lag a little bit. Once we put that in, once we have full power, we can release the brakes, and then I'm going to take some back pressure on the yoke. basically, if you leave it just sitting here, that nose wheel gets very unstable. So, but if you pull back on the stick a little bit, it's a lot easier to maintain stability with the rudder. You're going to have to be active on the rudder, but if you just leave it, no back pressure on the yoke, it's very easy, especially in a light breeze, to just lose control and skid out, and you do a little bumpy takeoff. We're trying to avoid that, so we're going to hold a little back pressure on the stick as we take off. So, we ready to go? Going to hold on the brakes, bring power up. Just gradually till we're just about in the yellow. And it should just be about too much for your brakes to handle. We're now release the brakes, and I'm pulling back on the stick, adding some back pressure. It's going to take a little bit of rudder, a lot of rudder to keep center line. And just as it comes up, add a little more back pressure and climb on out. Got positive rate. Landing gear can come up. Make sure that's coming up, and then flaps can come up as well, just at the top of the white arc. And from here, we're going to climb on out however we need to maintain that heading. We can also turn on yaw damper at this point. That'll help control some of the rudder inputs that we need. And so the rest of our, we can make sure that our flight directors are on, but it doesn't, the flight director system doesn't quite, you can see I have my indications, but it's not shown here. So that's a little bit, I don't know if it's buggy or how intended, but once we turn on autopilot, that'll go away. We're just climbing up, and the first thing that I noticed when we got up there, we're bringing the power back just into the top of the green. 36 psi or so is good. It should come down pretty naturally too a little bit, but just get yourself into a good climb idle. And if you want to go straight by the numbers, the manual has more specific recommendations as far as power settings. So we're climbing up now. Let's go ahead and turn our heading to I don't know, 06070 would be good. So we'll turn left to 070 to pick up the our course. And I'll put the autopilot on now, and we'll just recycle IAS so it'll climb out at 150 knots or so. That's a decent climb rate. You can climb faster or slower depending on the situation. But I talked a little bit about, you know, climbing at speed based on your situation. The PC-12 is an interesting plane because it's this very capable commercial airplane. So you're going to spend some time flying into small airports like Redmond. You might go to bush strips, but you can also go into major international airports. And you'll see PC-12s and TBMs and other airplanes like that at major international airports all the time. And obviously we can do 240 knots. But our approach speeds are very are low, much lower than a 737. We'll probably approach at flaps 15, our fastest speed, at 110, 115 knots. So a little bit of situational awareness, especially if you're online with other people in like a VATSIM environment, is good to have. But you may be slow, and that's okay. You're a PC-12, you're a turboprop. You're supposed to be a little bit slow. So that's okay. That's talking and not paying attention. So we'll set this up, and then once we're on course, we'll arm our nav mode to get over there. So one of the things I like about the PC-12 is the panel. I do appreciate just the standard 6-pack, but with the electronic stuff. So we have your electronic ADI and your electronic HSI. You can turn it into whatever mode you want down here. We talked about that a little bit. And then we have your airspeed indicator here. The white arc is going to be your approach speeds more or less, but then flaps below 160. But that's over here. And then we have our altitude indicator, which has both a digital readout and a dial component, as well as digital baro information. So it's almost like it's not steam gauge, but it's similar. It's not totally glass. It's kind of fun. Now on your HSI, you'll usually have the normal information. We've got 87 miles to our next waypoint if you have a VOR tuned. it'll go to that VOR, and we can do that here. It'll also show your heading bug and your course, as well as the time that it's going to take us to get there. It's saying it's going to take us 26 minutes, probably a little less than that. Now down on the side, we do have an OBS and a RMI indicator for ADFs, tune and ADFs, as well as your standby attitude indicator over here in case this should fail if you have an electronic failure. Again, not that we should in this version, but in certain ones you might. I'm going to go ahead and change our heading bug and just make sure we're synced up. And from here, it's pretty much just monitoring. Again, keeping the power, and if you want to increase power a little bit, you can. We're just keeping everything in the green arc. That's the nice thing about, you know, these gauges and this system. We just want to keep everything in the green, everything happy. But still climbing out 150 knots, but we're doing 203 knots over the ground now. So flight level 230, I believe we can go up to flight level 310 if you really want to. And it just depends on kind of the stage length you're flying. A lot of PC-12 flights are short, between an hour, hour and a half, between smaller airports. But if you're going further and really want to get up there, you are capable as a turboprop. So one note about flying in the flight levels here, we did get a cabin pressure warning. This is your cabin pressure panel here. Basically, we set the cabin controller, and in auto it should work. I believe that what happened is I set it a little under. So the manual recommends you set this to your cruising altitude plus 500 feet, so 2,300, 500 feet. And then when we hit top of descent, we're going to reduce it back down to 0 here manually. It won't do it automatically, so if you get a cabin pressure warning, check that. We want to make sure that the difference is in the green here, just like everything else. But again, it takes a little more thinking than I was doing. Alright, so we're just past the Wild Horse VOR. We're getting ready to start our descent, start thinking about our descent at least, into Boise. So I've got the initial approach fix. We're going to clear ourselves into it. And we got to be at 6,000 at Jimmy. So we're going to bring the altitude pre-selector down to 6,000 feet at Jimmy. And then you can descend either way. I'm just going to set us for a 1,000 foot per minute descent. The other thing, let's reset cabin altitude to the field elevation at Boise, which is going to be right about 2,800, so about 3,000 feet. We'll do that. We'll do that as we descend. So, can hit arm, and we're going to engage vertical speed mode, and I'm going to come back on the power a little bit. Set us for about 1,000 feet per minute. So you can see we've got our kind of dynamic overspeed needle here. Now that we're up high, we're doing about 280 across the ground, but only about 200 knots indicated. That needle will swing up as we get lower, but we don't want to bust it now as we're descending high up. So then we want to come down here and just keep moving things back to, it'll be back to surface level. So there you go, we're on our descent. I'm going to make sure that our lights are on, and then we'll get the weather at Boise. Boise's reporting information, India 1604 Zulu special, wind 040 at 3 knots, quarter mile visibility. We got some IFR conditions here. They're running the ILS Yankee approach to runway 10 right. Runway 10 left is closed in the real world. It's not going to be closed in sim, but we'll plan for 10 right. Not a ton of wind, but visibility sounds like going to be somewhat low. Gonna set our decision height. That's the one thing that's really tough to do, because you click it and then you gotta rotate it, but it takes forever to get up to what you need. We're looking for about 200 feet for the ILS. And if you're going higher, it takes a while. Oh, and see, that happens too, so the gear can come out. And that one's a tricky one. I should mind that. Kind of cool. You can see the low clouds out in front of us, kind of in the valley there. We're descending right now, all things good. Just about to cross 10,000. We'll make sure we have our lights on, and we'll run our approach checklist. We've got our lights and stuff on. Radios and nav aids, we're set to the ILS localizer frequency 111.1 at Boise for 10 right. Altimeter 3022 is set. Pressurization is set and depressurized nicely. We should be back at surface level for the cabin. Inertial separator should go on, so we avoid junk in the engine. And then our approach briefing, we're doing the ILS for runway 10 right. We do have some pretty low clouds. Boise still reporting quarter-mile visibility. So we may not see the runway, we may not break out until pretty late. We're at 6,000 till Jimmy. And then we'll start descending from there down to 4,400 at 7 DME. And then we'll pick up the glide slope there. Now, as far as our approach and landing goes, it is going to be, this is an airplane that's going to reward you for flying kind of by the numbers that they give you in the manual. For the manual, and I would, again, if you have the aircraft, look it up, have this handy when you're flying. But we're going to do a flaps 15 approach, which is kind of a standard long runway international airport approach. We don't need any short field or anything. We can do flaps 30 or 40, but we don't need to. That will be fine. So to start, we want to set our power back once we're kind of getting established to torque pressure of 15 psi. That'll get us to a speed of 150 knots, 150 knots, which is the speed at which, if you deploy the gear and flaps 15 at the same time, it'll minimize any bubbling of the airplane, any kind of other dynamics associated with adding that drag at that time. So we're going to bring power back now to 15. Once we have gear out and flaps 15, we can increase power to 20 psi to maintain 150 knots. Then as we get closer in, we're going to go to our approach speeds. They give you a table in the manual. We're going to be doing a flaps 15 approach. We're going to set a torque of between 9 and 10 psi, and we're going to shoot for an airspeed of 110 to 120 knots. Once we are crossing the fence, we'll bring the power back to idle, and we'll aim for an airspeed of around 100 knots on short final. So let me get this set up for 15. But again, my recommendation would be to look at the torque, try to get the airplane into those configurations. Our max gear extension speed is 177 knots, and flaps 15 is 164 knots and below. So we'll let the speed come back, and if we need to bring a little bit of power out, we can. To get it there. We do have anti-icing on, we've got all our de-ice on and stuff. It is kind of cold out 2C, but the cabin is a nice 24C, so we have the heating on. And we're going into the soup now. Lights are on, everything else is pretty much set up. We did get our decision height set, which is down here on this knob, so this airplane will call minimums at 200 feet above the ground. Alright, so we're about 5 miles from Jimmy now. We're at 170 knots of set torque to about 20 psi. Now, the speeds in this airplane are really important on approach. We want to make sure that we are setting those correctly, and the manual gives you a good breakdown about what power settings you want to be at. Essentially, we want to bring the power back to 15 psi to get the airplane to 150 knots. At 150 knots, the gear extension and flap extension kind of balances out the best. So we're going to let that come down as we get closer before we have to descend again. Speed's good. Bring gear down and flaps down now. And then at that point, we can bring power back up to 20 psi if we're level. Now, for the approach, we're going to be approaching with flaps 15. You can do it with flaps 30 or 40 with lower speeds. But flaps 15, we're going to be aiming for an approach speed of about 110 to 115 knots. That will be, we'll set the torque to 9 to 10 psi to do that. And then as we cross the fence, so to speak, we're going to bring the power to idle and try to aim for about 10 knots below that, so about 100 knots. So here is Jimmy now. The airplane's going to pick this up, and then we're going to basically bug this heading so I can go into arm approach mode, and we're going to go down to 4,400 feet. We're just going to descend at speed. So descending into the soup now, and then we should be able to get our DME. So if we go over to heading, and we're going to click over to the localizer, localizer 1, we can get back into nav mode. And then when you're ready, we can arm approach mode. So we've got the localizer here. Now we're looking at 11 DME from the airport, and at, let me pull up the chart, and at 7.7 we want to be at or above 4,400. So we'll bring the power back a little bit, just increase the descent rate a bit. And again, we've got real low ceilings today, so it's going to be pretty important that we keep an eye out for the airport and be ready to go around. If we go around, we're climbing 3,300 feet, right turn, and then turn to 7,300 feet outbound on the Boise VOR 113 radial. That's on 113.3, so we can punch that in here, 113.3, so we've got it ready to go. 1,000 feet from 4,400. And then we want 4,100, 5.7 DME. So last checks, lights on, inertial separator on, our de-ice is on for the moment. We want to make sure all our lights on. You can turn on your recognition lights just to get yourself a little bit more. And then everything else should be good. We're set flaps 15. You can check that on your indicator here. Again, if you need to do a shorter field approach, flaps 30 and flaps 40 are available to you. So you can use flaps 40 and 30. Especially flaps 40, though, you're going to be approaching very slow, so it takes some practice to get right, and that's why we're not doing that here, because I think it's frankly a separate, kind of a separate exercise. So we've captured 4,100, or 4,400, we can capture 4,100 next. So let's take a quick look at our ADI here. Glide slope isn't going to be on the right, that green triangle. That's coming in. It can be a little hard to see at times. But glide slope's coming in, and we should be able to capture here at 4,100, about 5 miles from the airport. So keep an eye on that, and then of course you've got your distance. If you got if you got the localizer in, you can get your distance information from here. Then I just like to scoot up too in the cockpit, just so I can get these gauges a little bit bigger. But you see we're descending, we've captured, and now we're going to reset. Once we've descended through, we'll reset our altitude capture for the go-around. At this point, we can also bring our power back. We're going to go, just again, it's a little early, but because we've got bad weather, and this is familiarization flight, let's work ahead. Bring us back to approach power between 9 and 10 psi. If you're a little fast, you can go lower. If you're a little slow, you can go a little faster. But if you fly it by the numbers, it's going to be a lot more comfortable than just kind of going for it. We're 3 miles from the runway now. Really descending into the soup here. You can see the ground. I can't see the runway. And then our altitude is 3,036 feet. We may not see it. And there's the runway. So I'm pulling autopilot off. We're crossing the threshold, so bringing power back. Whew, we're real low. Bringing power back, and now we're just going to hold back pressure. And just like on takeoff, we want to keep that nose wheel off the ground for as long as we can, and just bleed speed off. So come in, set the airplane down. It will float if you let it. And then we're just holding the stick and letting the speed die out, and then we can kick it into reverse. Reverse speed down to 50 knots is what they like to say. If you hold reverse in past 50 knots, it'll slow you to a stop. It's not a big deal, but it's embarrassing to stop on the runway. And then we're going to exit right here at Bravo 2, just ahead, and get off this runway. So that was a little hairy, and we got a little low there, but we did make it, and hey, that's a fun approach. Again, I wouldn't recommend that for your first approach in the PC-12, but it does give you a good, just a good example of flying this IFR, flying it by the numbers, and kind of being set up where you want to be. That's not, that's not a trivial task. We're going to taxi. We're going to take a right here and taxi to GA ramp via Bravo. And so important off the runway, we want to pull it back to ground idle, otherwise it'll take off on you, and then flaps up to clear everything else. Inertial separator can stay on until we get to the gate. And then we just got taxi lights on. And so welcome to Boise, everyone. Parking brake can come on, and at this point we're going to bring essential bus. Our condition lever back to idle. You turn off all of our heat and probes, de-ice, seatbelt signs as well. If you want, we can turn on external power, and we can sit here. Finally, come back here, unlock, and open those doors up. So there you have it, a low IFR approach into Boise International Airport. That was hairy, but we made it. Again, this is a really fun airplane. I didn't like it when I first got in. It takes a lot of rudder inputs on approach, on final. Using the yaw damper is going to help with that, but still, especially on takeoff and landing, really, when you're taking off and landing, we want to hold the nose wheel as much off the runway as we can to avoid spinning out of control. And then just being on the speeds, they call them out in the manual, this plane flies really nicely. If you just kind of wing it and gun it, you're going to be uncomfortable a lot. So it's a fun plane. It really does fly the way they say it should fly. And I've been really enjoying putting around in it. So thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, comments, other planes you want us to see, it's been a little bit, but there's a lot of cool stuff coming down the pike. And hopefully we'll be able to cover most of that. So, thank you all for watching. Usual YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe if you're able. Really appreciate it, and it helps us grow the channel. And that's all for us. If you fly the PC-12, enjoy it. Otherwise, happy flying.